external corporate governance mechanism that has been quite effective in many markets is the market for corporate control. So if there is any wrongdoing in one firm, that will be taken over by the company that is doing right. And hence that precludes any wrongdoing in the first place. So the point is why this market doesn't exist in India. As you can see that the market for corporate control in India is quite limited. In fact, it doesn't exist. What you have to understand here is that the average ownership by the promoters in India is about 48%. And in some cases, it's as high as 80%. Then how can you have a market for corporate control? If you take the US market, where it is run by professional managers in contrast to the owner managers in India, the professional managers do not own the firm. Even if they own, it would be negligible equity as a proportion of the total equity of the firm. Hence, given that most of the equity is a free float, there would be a market for corporate control. However, in India, due to concentration of ownership, it precludes a market for corporate control. Now, the question is, given that liberalization has made more corporates, operating in the Indian market, and with the global forces that's acting on corporate India, would you see a change in this organizational structure? Well, my research shows that, in fact, the ownership concentration is increasing, and most of the promoters are buying back their equity. Well, this would lead to a plausible conclusion that in the years to come, I don't foresee any huge market for corporate control in India. On the other hand, I would see the dominance of business groups to increase in the Indian corporate market. Let's move on to the role of institutional investors on the corporate governance mechanism of firms. Well, there is a lot of research evidence, especially in the US market, that institutional investors are a significant stakeholders who fight for the shareholders' rights. And there are many cases where the companies or the managers of the firms had to succumb to the pressures and then listen to the institutional investors. However, the institutional investors are mainly divided into two types. One group of institutional investors are called as the active group. For example, you come across institutional investors like private equity players, or even the pension fund players to some extent, or the mutual funds to some extent. There could be some financial institutions who are inactive, and so they could be this passive group of institutional investors. In the case of Indian market, most of the domestic institutional investors are relatively passive. One reason could be, as I mentioned earlier, majority of the ownership lies with the owner managers or the promoters. So even if you have an institutional investors, they can. It's highly unlikely that they can get the majority of, say, in the firm, or in terms of voting rights. Their role is relatively limited. However, even though you are a minority, there is every chance that you can voice your grievances. In the case of Indian market, the evidence indicate that foreign institutional investors have been raising their grievances much better compared to the domestic institutional investors. One classic case is Satyam. So the whole Satyam episode came out purely because of aggressive selling by the foreign institutional investors. However, the role of institutional investors on the corporate governance mechanism of Indian firms is still at a very nascent stage. Yeah, there is some change happening though. For example, now SEBI is trying to promote the participation of institutional investors when companies go for IPOs. There is a reservation for the institutional investors, investments on the corporate, firms in India. But I think in the near future, I don't see a big sea change in terms of the active role of institutional investors on Indian firms. But however, there are a lot of steps being taken by SEBI to ensure that the role of institutional investors going to increase in the coming years.